today. Our first set of speakers, we are very privileged to have Dr. Jeremy Levin and Dr. Matthew Deering here from Ovid Therapeutics. So you're going to get a program tonight at the gala, or tomorrow night at the gala, that has all the information about everyone who's speaking today. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things because Dr. Levin's going to get up and talk first. So Dr. Levin is the chairman and CEO of Ovid Therapeutics. And in 2012, Fierce Biotech voted him as one of the 25 most influential people in the pharmaceutical industry. So the fact that he and Matthew are here and they're going to focus on Angelman Syndrome, this is a big deal for us. I also want to mention that before he came to Ovid, he was the president and CEO of Pharmaceutical Industries. It's one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. He was also a member of the executive committee at Bristol Myers Squibb, where he put in place some strategies that really turned around Bristol Myers Squibb and made them a much more viable company. So this is the person we need to help us look for therapeutics and to run this. Dr. Deering was here last year and spoke with us, and he's here again today. And he's a Harvard and Yale trained neuroscientist, spent many years on the faculty at Yale. He pioneered the use of viral vectors for neurological disorders. So if you have some questions about that, you might want to talk to him about that as well, because it's really fascinating. He is the founder of Ovid Therapeutics, and he is also serving as the chief scientific officer at the moment. So I'm going to have Jeremy come up and start to address, and then afterwards we will take questions from the audience for both Jeremy and Matthew. So let's thank Jeremy again for being here.
Thank you, Becky. This is obviously something very important, and if somebody has lost it, Becky, is this yours? Yeah. There you go. I learned to my cost, I put my name behind it just in case. So thank you so much, Becky. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, and family, it's a true honor to be here with you today. I want to thank a number of you. If you don't mind, just give me a bare minute, and I'm going to refer to my notes as I go through this, because sometimes I forget names. It's not that anything's wrong with me, but I am getting older. So I want to thank Paula Evans, Becky Burdine, Alison Barrett, and the rest of the FAST team for the invitation to speak, and for the terrific event. I've just seen some wonderful things. I'm really excited what we were doing. So that group of people, they really helped me understand a lot more about how I could engage with and help find therapies. So, but much more important, if I can ask you a question, if I may, it's just to help me again, and perhaps to set the grounding for what I really believe in, and that is the patient. May I ask those of you who are parents who've had their child diagnosed this last year to hold up your hand? And then may I ask those who, just keep your hands up for a moment, those of you who have had their child diagnosed in the last 5 years, and in the last 10 years, and in the last 20 years. I think that to me speaks so much, and even further. I think you all know each other, and for all of us, we will have different levels of knowledge. But one thing that I'm absolutely certain of, you know more about your children than anybody else. And we're going to learn from you as we go through developing the therapies. And it's my goal that we can help you make a difference to your lives and theirs. Some of you asked me why I chose to devote myself to building a company such as Ovid. Actually, Matthew started Ovid. I was given the chance to go and run another 150,000 person company, and Matthew approached me and showed me what the true problem was. Something that was very real, for which I'm incredibly grateful, Matthew. And I want to take you through a little bit of my thinking then, and then in addition to that, move on afterwards and tell you a little bit about what we're doing, if that's okay with you. So prior to Ovid, indeed, I did lead one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. I had the privilege of bringing medicines to millions of people. In fact, 1 in 6 medicines in the United States, 1 in 6 pills in the United States came from the company that I that I ran. But throughout the last 25 years, as I focused on building and growing companies, I've always focused on the patient. To me, nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. I admired and learned this from some of the leaders in the industry. Not everybody, but some very specific people. For us here today, there's much to learn from the bravery of some of those people in jumping in to areas that nobody else wanted to jump in on. 20 years ago, I witnessed the birth of one of the first rare disease companies, Genzyme, which brought a unique medicine to a very rare disorder, Gaucher's. Fast forward 20 years, a patient that would have died took me out for lunch a week ago. Under the leadership of one man, Henry Chir, who was brave enough to go into this, and in doing so changed the lives of many and actually began to instill into those of us in the big companies different ways of thinking and how we look at rare disorders. 15 years ago, the then new CEO of Novartis, Dr. Daniel Vasella, actually a psychiatrist by training, went against conventional wisdom and was led by science to build a program to find a cure for what was then described as a very rare cancer, not to be ignored, to be forgotten. And he asked only one question: will the program that we have help patients? And when the answer from the scientists was yes, he ignored all the marketing people who said you can never, ever, ever get this to patients because we're only interested in big drugs. Novartis found that drug, and in doing so has brought tens of thousands of years of life to thousands and thousands of patients who would otherwise have died. 10 years ago, the same occurred in Bristol Myers Squibb, where under the leadership of a very remarkable man, not a doctor, but a man who lives out west, a little further west than here, a man called Jim Cornelius, with the support of amazing scientists, went against the entire prevailing scientific wisdom to enter into an area to find another form of cure for another rare sort of cancer, which he did through an untested field called immuno-oncology. Remarkable. And in doing so, I saved many, many lives. So I was privileged to be in all three of those companies at the time those decisions were taken. We were able to make a real difference to patients, their families, and the medical providers. And frankly, for those of you sitting in the audience, you know, it's something that we should expect and demand of the biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies, that they focus on the patient and that they do exactly that. And that's why I'm here. The patient was and is central. But actually, it's not just a professional philosophy of mine to devote myself to patients. It's actually very personal. Very personal. From my funny accent, you know I'm South African originally. I experienced something in South Africa as a child quite remarkable, and that has influenced me very substantially. And it's some very little of what you are experiencing with your children. My uncle was born unable to hear, talk, walk properly, and in his early years he was epileptic. We never had a diagnosis. He threw tantrums, he got angry, but we understood his frustrations when nobody else did. We cared for him. And when others thought he was intellectually impaired, we knew otherwise. He was kind, he was funny, and he smiled a heck of a lot. But the odd thing was he definitely knew how to press our buttons. The schools at that time, unlike here, rejected him. The neighbors and our childhood friends, to me as a little boy, was sympathetic but a little bit nervous and really didn't understand. But we did. He lived with us, and when my father died, his last spoken word was that we would have to look after him for the rest of his life. And we did. As the family has done, so I've understood. But it's a small comparison to what you are dealing with. I know that, but it has influenced me. My uncle was a wonderful man and has influenced me profoundly in the way I think about this company and the way we develop our drugs. So, over all those years and into my medical career, that kind of an experience has helped me understand just how central the family is to the care and well-being of all patients. In Ovid, I now have the opportunity where I can devote my career, my life, my time to finding medicines that can help your children. And hopefully, in doing so, Ovid can set an example to the industry. One which will catalyze many new research efforts, new thinking, new ideas, new approaches, new medicines. I think, Becky, you said it well. The level to which the acceleration has happened is remarkable, catalyzed by the help of so many people in this room and others who've devoted themselves and their resources to making it happen, and I know it's going to accelerate. So, today as we think and consider the developments in Angelman's, which are remarkable, the message is quite clear to me. There's real hope to develop treatments that can and will help your children. There is no doubt of this in my mind whatsoever. We'll be a partner with you as we walk down this complex pathway, and believe you me, it is complex, to find medicines that can positively affect your lives. So I want you to understand, I have absolutely no illusions about what it takes to discover and develop medicines. I've been involved in literally hundreds of projects. Actually, I've spent billions of dollars, or directed billions of dollars to be spent on developing drugs and bringing medicines to patients. Done correctly, however, I know it can bring huge benefit, and we're going to do it correctly. But I want you, because you are who you are, and you know your children, and there's nothing to be hidden from you, that this is not an easy thing to do. It's complex. Just give you an example. For every 5,000 to 10,000 chemicals tested in animals as potential drugs, only 5 to 10 ever enter into human clinical trials. And of those, only 1 becomes an approved drug. And the process from the laboratory through the clinical trials and eventually approval by the FDA and EMEA, the European agency that regulates drugs, takes a considerable period of time. No shortcuts can be taken. At every stage, the safety of the patient must be taken into consideration, and I can assure you, we will do. On the road to approval of a medicine, in addition, there are partnerships that have to be made, and in particular here in Angelman's, with clinicians, patients, families, patient advocacy groups, and much work and collaboration with the FDA, who honestly try their very best to help and will try their very best to help. They're a remarkable agency when it comes to working with them about medicines of this kind. This is a complex and process and requires tremendous planning, thought, and at the end of it, impeccable execution. But it brings results, and it will bring results. Today, as you've heard, for Angelman, behavioral and cognitive approaches, physical, speech, and language therapy, diet and nutrition are a mainstay. So you're right, Becky, there are approaches, definitely. No therapies yet treat the underlying disease causes. Symptomatic therapy with anti-epileptic drugs for seizure, melatonin, for example, and hypnotics for difficulty in sleeping, laxatives for constipation. But just to be very clear, there have been no major clinical trials of new therapies. And this is important. This is unlike other areas where there's a good roadmap for us to follow. The good news is, though, due to the And thanks to the exceptional scientific work Ed and others have pioneered, it's terrific. Over the last decade, the focus and the evidence around the pivotal role of UB3A is very important. I know that you've seen a lot of science, but I want you to understand that without a roadmap, without a sign, without an understanding of the critical pathways, it means nothing, because you're just then trying out drugs on phenomenology, trying out drugs on things that you think will work, without knowing that you have in your hand a clear molecular pathway that you can go after. This is what new science is all about. This is what new drug discovery is all about. And with that, there's real opportunity. Broadly, you've heard this morning, but I think it's important to reiterate it, that there are two general approaches. The first is to try and restore the UB3A expression, the way it works, its function, and to impact it directly. That's a very important role, and I think we're going to see a lot more developing in that area. And frankly, I'm very excited to see it and I'm to learn about it. And as we get closer to it, to really involve ourselves in it potentially. Importantly, is to intervene equally downstream. This is the second approach, downstream of the UB3A gene. And it's here that we, Ovid, have chosen to focus our initial efforts. It's because we believe we can bring results much more quickly that way. Our drug, OV101, acts in that region. It's at the level of cellular function where we think at this time, there is the maximal opportunity to impact many of the important effects of the syndrome. Now, just to put you on a level playing field, and many of you have heard this, but others, if you haven't, I'd like to just take a moment to tell you this. OV101 has been given to over 3,000 adults in clinical trials to test its role in helping patients with sleep disorders. It reached phase 3A. That's the last stage before approval. But it was never approved for use. It's very important to understand, it was never approved for use. It was only after these initial trials were stopped that it was fully appreciated that the drug actually impacted downstream of UB3A in a manner that was strongly suggestive that it could help patients with Angelman, and then demonstrated in animal models of Angelman's. The drug has shown minimal side effects. That's good, very important for us as we consider our children that could be taking this. It's been used, as I say, for 3,000 patients, and it's really very important that we understand how that drug works, and we do today. But it's never been given to children. And because it's a drug that's never been approved by the FDA, we need to think through very carefully, and we will think through very carefully, how we construct the appropriate clinical trial. I am completely confident that we will do this correctly. And if the trials are successful, OV101 holds immense potential to help the Angelman community overall. Now, as we planned our clinical approach, we studied prior attempts to test other drugs. Many of you are familiar, obviously, with the minocycline trial, and you'll probably ask, well, how come that trial went very fast? How come that was tested so quickly? Remember, I said to you, OV101 has never been approved. Minocycline, unlike OV101, is an approved drug, allowing clinicians to use it and design their own trials rapidly. In addition, unfortunately, unlike other disease areas like cancer, cardiovascular disease, etc., there is no major history of trials to understand how best to construct these trials. The approach with OV101, with your help, and those of the clinicians and others who support us, is an exciting opportunity to use rigorous and modern approaches to design a trial to ensure the best possible clinical and scientific outcome. So what are we doing? Over the last year, we've secured and qualified our drug. We're preparing for our initial submissions for the FDA, and it's our intent that we begin clinical trials for this drug in the second half of 2016. But most importantly, and this is critical, over the last several months, we've sought to understand what are the most difficult problems and biggest challenges that each family faces on a day-to-day basis. This has helped inform our design and where best we should be testing in the clinical trial OV101. We've interviewed a lot of people. Some of you are in the audience today, and I'm very grateful for the time that you spent with us. We know, as I said, where OV101 works. It works on the extrasynaptic GABA receptor. It impacts a technical function of the brain called tonic inhibition. Very important. And we know it works on animal models. And we've now asked the question, where should we be spending time to test it with the greatest impact clinically? And particularly, how should we run a clinical trial to ensure that Angelman Syndrome patients show maximal benefits and have the potential to improve to a point where there's a major impact on that individual and his or her family. To do this correctly and in the best possible manner, we had to get a real appreciation of the needs, as I said. For example, understanding the impacts of seizures, sleep disorders, aspiration, constipation, dental care, vision, obesity, scoliosis, bone density, mobility, communication, behavior, and anxiety. This is not trivial. You all live it. But to refine it to a point where the FDA will approve a trial is something which is not an art form, it's a science. And we need to treat it like that, and with your help and your involvement, your engagement, we will do. And honestly, remembering my uncle, I asked a different question. What do the children truly understand? And what is their true potential? And how can we help in that? Because I think often people misunderstand the behaviors that they see for the understanding that's actually there. And how many of you probably believe the same? As I said, with the help of many of you in the audience today, we believe we now have a good understanding of these matters. And because of this, and although it's taken time, we're in the final stage of the designing our proposed trial. This proposal will need to be discussed with the FDA, and we're looking forward to that dialogue. As I mentioned before, the FDA is a tremendous partner, one that I respect and we respect and look forward to engaging with. And as we prepare for the next stage, which is dialoguing with the FDA, then setting in place all of the requirements of operating an appropriately designed and managed clinical trial, first in young adults and then hopefully after in younger children, will start in the USA first, but our intent is also to work in the EMA with the EMEA and to extend our trials globally. And we'll do that in a manner that I've done many times before. I know exactly how this is done. Ovid has the team to do it, and we will do it in a completely appropriate way. So I want you to understand, if I can convey this to you, we at Ovid are focused on you and your children, and we intend to devote ourselves to their well-being. Hopefully we'll be able to bring an important medicine to them. And frankly, I'm not just excited by this prospect. I and my team are utterly committed, but I'm also very, very optimistic. So thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. And if I'm not able to answer them, I promise you I will ask Matthew to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for some really fantastic discussions, so we would ask you to come up to the microphones if you have questions. Please don't be shy. This is for us as the parents to understand what we want to understand, so As we always say well, what I say to my students, there are no questions that aren't worth asking if you want that answer. So let's go. Go for it.
Good morning. Son? My name is Dave Rosenblatt. My son is Nico. He's 4 years old. There's been a lot of discussion in the press recently about pricing in the pharmaceutical industry for treatments of rare conditions, with some therapeutics costing upwards of several $100,000 per year. And I was curious, as you all are approaching investors and talking about the prospects of this research, which are tremendously exciting, how are you all thinking about approaching the pricing question?
David, I think this is probably one of the central issues that you should be asking. And, well, first of all, let's get the cure, and then we'll ask the question. I have decided what would I like to do with a company. I am not interested in a company that exploits patients and exploits families and exploits the system. I'm interested in a company that can demonstrate that its drugs have a direct impact on the patient and can help them. So, the discussion in the press today that you see is completely justified. For the last 20 to 30 years, unfortunately for me, and I'm probably one of a growing voice, thank heavens, in the industry of executives who are not interested in the consistent raising of prices. I believe you need affordable medicines. I believe that you need medicines that have a result. And I believe that you need to construct the company, and I am going to construct the company to address exactly that. And so that's... I would add one thing. It doesn't necessarily make me very popular with all my colleagues. But every single person in this audience should understand this is front and center in our thinking. We will not be doing these exceptionally expensive drugs that you've seen. It will not be the case with Ovid.
Great. Thank you.
Is this trial going to be a double-blind? Will there be placebos involved in it?
Matthew, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Absolutely. I feel, having had significant experience with what we call open label design, where you have an interest, the moment you give a drug to an individual, there is so many changes that occur with that trial design that give belief and hope that unless you have a control and you have a blind, any benefit, you're never really convinced how much of that impact is from the drug. And I think the main reason not to do a blinded study initially in most drug development is simply one of safety. In other words, the FDA requires us typically to do phase 1 trials when that drug has not been proven, and you do what we call an open label. In fact, everyone knows what the drug is, simply because of safety. If we feel confident, and we do feel confident about the safety of our compound, the OV101, then I think what we want to do is we want to make sure that every person who is involved in our trial, that at the end of the day we have a result that we can speak with some confidence that this drug truly worked, not simply that you believed it worked or that there was a change that could have been simply related to belief in the drug as opposed to a functional effect. And you can only do that rigorously with a double-blind study. So yes, we are doing a double-blind study.
How long do you think the trial will last?
So it's a very good question. At this stage, and this, as Jeremy had mentioned, we're working in partnership with the FDA, but we expect the trial design to be approximately 3 months. So we would look for a 3-month duration. We feel that the drug's effects and benefits should be seen much quicker than that. Certain change at this drug, unlike drugs which primarily relate or only work through what we'd call plasticity or changing the modeling of synapses or dendrites, that may take sometimes some considerable time for maximal impact. Here we believe we will get those type of effects possibly as well, but we'll see initial effects that occur within the matters of hours to days. However, we believe that you have to remember the moment you have some freedom, say for example you have a drug that, and we believe our drug should, improve motor skills, there will be subsequent gain just by improving motor. There'll be a learning component to that, and we may not see the maximal benefit that it comes after, it'll require 2 to 3 months to see that. So at this stage, we're looking at a 3-month trial.
May I ask your name? Sorry.
Oh, Donna Manhart, thank you.
Donna, just a point. And everything we say, everything, must be qualified that we will do nothing until the FDA and I and Ovid have finished the dialogue. So whatever we state here are aspirational,
Right.
but actually, let us come back to you with the full design once we've had a full dialogue with them. Because I think, for me, my experience is they're great partners. They give you good insight, and whether we say 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, my intent is to have the right trial, not the fastest trial, and not the longest trial, and not looking for every result that we possibly could have. So I think we're right on the right track now, so I think it's a great question.
Thank you. Yeah, I understand. Thank you very much. And I think I'm speak for everybody here. We really do appreciate the time and the effort and the interest in our children.
Hi, my daughter is 31 years old, and I've been waiting a long time for this, and I want to thank you for the hope you've given me today. And my question is, for the clinical trial, is my daughter too old for it?
My answer to that is very simple. Matthew will design the trial for the best possible result, but your child will have the opportunity, if we're successful, of getting that drug, that is for sure, and in a relatively short period of time.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, what is your name?
Connie.
Connie, you know what, it's a weird thing. I actually like hearing people's names because I'm talking to them.
Yeah, just to expand on that, as Jeremy said, we have a lot of safety data in adult patients, and this first trial, we believe at this stage, and this will, as Jeremy had mentioned, it's depending on the FDA, but we're not going to have an artificial cutoff at age 30 or 31 or 35. So I think it's going to be, if there are any restrictions or exclusion criteria, they'll probably relate to function. Simply, we need to be able to assess that individual based on the FDA feedback of certain endpoints. So it's more going to be a functional, but I would say you have every reason to hope that your child will be able to be involved in the trial.
Thank you.
I don't think this is on.
Okay, I'm just going to say it really loud. We have a question from our live feed. What do you think the outcome measures will be for your trial? This is from Terry Jo Michelle.
Hello, Terry Jo. We don't yet want to answer that, not because we don't know. We have several opportunities to dialogue with the FDA, and I'd like to hold fire on that until we've had a full discussion with them, if that's okay with you.
Hi, I'm Bridget. My son has UPD. Is he going to be available to take this drug, or is it only for deletion children?
So it's a very good question. From a trial perspective, ideally we'd like the most consistent group, and we will require a genetic diagnosis. I think Becky didn't discuss that there are individuals with Angelman who don't meet those 4 criteria. I think they have pathognomic features. In other words, they have the EEG pattern, they have everything suggesting they have Angelman, yet we don't have a genetic diagnosis. That group, unfortunately, we will not include, but UPD, mutations, imprinting defects, and deletions will all be available, we believe, in this trial. So long as we have a genetic diagnosis, I think we can move forward.
Thank you.
Did you have another one, Becky? Oh.
I don't have it online, but I just wanted to make a mention with that. I know there are a lot of people in the audience that have children. We call them children, but they now have young adults or adults. And many of you don't have official diagnosis paperwork because when your kids were being diagnosed, they didn't really do some of the testing. Given that this trial is thinking it's going to be targeted towards young adults or adults, this might be the ammunition you need to go back to your insurance companies and say, I need that molecular diagnosis now because there is something that my child might qualify for. You can talk to me about that afterwards if you need some help with that. So, now yours.
Okay. Actually, Becky, can I just expand on that? We would need some sort of screening process, but we'd be happy as a company if you meet criteria that suggests clinically you have Angelman. I believe, Jeremy, you can expand on this, but I think we'd be happy to actually pay for that testing if it was necessary. So,
yep. Absolutely.
Actually, this is Mary Ann. My husband and I drove to Florida, which was about a 3-day trip to get a methylation test done in 1992 by Dr. Driscoll. So yeah, we did have that. But I was wondering where the testing was going to take place, and how much travel would be involved. I know you can't answer that definitively. And then I was wondering, just by an answer to another question, when you talked about functionality, were you thinking high end or low end?
Matthew, I think it would be best to say we have yet to enter into negotiations with the clinical centers that we would like to have. We have had contact with pretty much all of the top tier investigators that we would like to work with. So I'm afraid I can't answer that question until we actually know that the institutions will permit us to run the trial there, but we will be picking. I'm so sorry about the 3-day trip. You know, for somebody who was born in South Africa,
I would
three-day
go
trip is
anywhere,
normal.
trust me.
But
I would go to South Africa if I had to.
You won't have to, trust me. It'll be here in the United States.
Would it be multiple locations,
Yes.
you think? Oh.
Yes. We'll try and make it as convenient as possible as we possibly can. And we understand, again, some of the burdens that's going to be put on people, and we'll try and help there as well.
What about the functionality? Can you answer that?
Yeah, based on the mechanism of action of OV101, we would expect to see potential benefit on both those maximally impacted and the most severe functional deficits and those who have the least. So we're not going to use the question really is in part, even on mobility, we're trying to think creatively, how can we have endpoints that can actually address individuals who may have very, very mobility, even those who may be in a wheelchair. So, our goal ultimately is to have the drug, assuming that we can prove efficacy, and with all the caveats that Jeremy just mentioned, is to be able to get this out to the broadest group. And so from a trial perspective, we can't say too much about that until we have this dialogue with the FDA, but we're trying to include endpoints that we believe can capture the greatest range of individuals.
And it will be easy to find out how to apply, I'm
Yep.
assuming?
We
Okay.
will be making very clear notices about that, and particularly in association with those centers that are involved with us, we will make very clear notices. This is a process. I know it's a little different for you. For me, it's kind of bread and butter, and I can assure you the team that's working within Ovid will make absolutely sure not only is the contact, the association with the physician, and if there's not a physician close by, we'll make sure that you are well aware of how to get in touch with us. By the way, you're an extraordinarily linked community, so it's going to make it an enormous benefit to us as we consider this trial.
And I'll just remind everybody that Ovid is working with the advocacy groups. So as long as you're tuned into FAST on our Facebook page, our Twitters, our email accounts, and things like that, we will make sure that you get the information.
Yep, it's a very important association.
Hi, my name is Kathy. My son's 7 and he has UPD also. Thank you for being here. And my understanding from last year is that OV101 helps a lot of aspects of Angelman Syndrome. And I understand that you want to target the trial in a way that it shows effect. And I'm curious, what are you specifically targeting? And if you can even share that, is it mobility or is it something else?
So one of the important things for us in this discovering how best to use the drug was to ask patients, to ask physicians, what are the most important things that affected them? And as we understood more and more about this, it became clear that the array was quite significant, ranging from, as many of you know, sleep being a critical item, in addition to mobility. I think my understanding was that epileptic seizures were ones that could be relatively well controlled under certain circumstances. So that was, although were important, we hope it'll have an impact there. The question for us on the trial is, what should we seek as our primary endpoints? I think we need to dialogue clearly with evidence in front of the FDA about what that would be. But there's nothing that is unusual to you. You know these symptoms. What we have to do now is to convince the FDA that we have ways of measuring impact on them. Now, scientifically, there is an extremely good reason to believe that we'll have an impact across the board. That's different from going to the FDA and say we have clear measures that will allow you to approve this drug. And it's not like minocycline, which is an antibiotic. We're approving an antibiotic, then it's an approved antibiotic, and then you can use it for other things. In this case, here we have a complex set of symptoms, but we also now, which is really wonderful, have a deep understanding of the pathway and the impact that it has on the cells. So I think we have a chance of explaining to them which are the different symptoms we should be focusing on. But I think we should wait until that's done. It's not going to delay the trial. That is going to be something that, unless something remarkable happens, will again, as I said to you, second half of 2016, and we'll announce what we're looking for, and the principal investigators will be very clear. They'll be part of the decision making here.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Kim. You said young adults. My hypothetical question, and I have two questions, is if you reach your endpoints and safety and efficacy endpoints in the trial of young adults, what is the plan for our younger children? Is there a clinical trial coming next? Is it a reduced dosage? What would the plan be for those who have younger children? My son is 6. That's my first question. I have one more then.
Okay. Kim, you're exactly right. The reason that we're taking this approach, and we're optimistic that we can perhaps have a good dialogue with the FDA to explain why we believe the drug is so safe and could be used more broadly. But we don't want to assume that. It's our assumption, first of all, that we need, as we go into the young adults where the drug has been used before and the dosages are well understood, that we can have the opportunity either to, with the FDA's support, either to extend this into younger children in the same way, or indeed to do the types of safety testing that they may want us to do or not do. I don't know yet. I think that's a dialogue they have to have, but it is something that we should be conscious of, whether it be a gene therapy, whether it be an antibody, whether it be a small molecule, whether it be, no matter what the disorder is, you must be conscious of the dosages that you use. You can't simply reduce it and give it to a child. That's not appropriately. That, to my mind, that's not good medicine, it's not good science. And what we want to do is to build for a 20-year, 30-year process, not a 2-minute result. So forgive me again for not answering you, but I can assure you I'm sitting on this and thinking it through, and we are right on top of the idea. How do we get it to a child of 6? How do we get it to a baby? How do we get it to the child as soon as it's born? Things like that. Matthew, do you want to add anything to that?
There is what we call a regulatory process with the FDA and the EMA, the European, to present to them what we call a pediatric development plan. And in that plan, as Jeremy just hinted, there's 2 ways. Some drugs you can actually look at children as mini adults and it's just dosing. And there are many drugs that, because of the difference in way various foreign molecules are handled by a child versus an adult, you have to think very differently, not just dose them based on kilogram body weight, for example. We have every reason to believe that this particular drug, OV101, is a very clean drug. What I mean by that is that it isn't extensively metabolized in the body. 70% of it gets excreted unchanged through the kidneys. And that one metabolic step is a very trivial step. So typically, unless you have very severe renal failure, you don't handle this drug any differently. So we would expect, and this is as Jeremy had mentioned, everything is a caveat, but we would expect that we can move towards children a little bit quicker than you would with a drug which has got a very complex metabolism. That being said, we're going to present very early on to the FDA what we believe and how we'd like to move into children, and we'd like to accelerate that process if possible. It will follow the adult trial, but in the time, duration, and the delay in moving to children, we can't speak to right now. But it is first most in our mind is to get this into, as Jeremy mentioned, to the broadest group and build this drug in the way we can for the long term.
Thank you. My second question was, in your original trial with 3,000 adults for sleep disorder, was it submitted for approval, or why was it stopped during stage 3?
This is one of those very strange, actually I'd be more than happy to take the drug myself based on what I learned about it. But Matthew, why don't you explain?
It's an amazing drug, and I think, and the people who discovered it, invented it, carry around in their suitcases and take it every day because they're such huge believers. And any of you in the audience who want to read more about the experience, there's a beautiful article in Harper's Magazine by a soph entitled Psychonaut, I referred to this last year, who talks about his own experience. The reason the drug ultimately didn't get approved was really was a commercial decision. There was no, as a sleeping pill, it was being developed by a company where the primary drug that was used was Ambien, and the issue that they were trying to push was to say, can this replace Ambien? Can it be? They were looking at this drug to be a $2 billion drug, to be the sleeping pill of all time, because unlike Ambien, has no interaction with alcohol, has no next day tiredness, does not have abuse potential, improves the sleep architecture and the quality of sleep. So at every level, it looked like a better drug. The bottom line was, when it came to the end of the day in sleep studies at phase 3, its efficacy as a sleep drug is not as potent as Ambien. When you look at when the FDA is not so concerned about sleep quality, they just look at what's the duration of sleep, what is the sleep latency, not the total sleep. They don't look to say how much slow wave sleep, how do you feel refreshed the next day. So it could never stand up directly, it was not superior to Ambien, and so therefore that didn't provide it. And then because of the lack of abuse potential, the FDA subs told the developers, that was Merck at the time, to say, look, if you really want to promote it as a drug that has no abuse potential, you have to study patients who have a history who had active drug abuse. So that required them to actually go out and recruit cocaine addicts, people who are using drugs of abuse, and not just take those patients but also use doses 3 times greater than you'd ever use sleeping. And in that particular trial, they did a side-by-side comparison of the Ambien. They showed a small number of those patients who had a history of drug abuse had euphoria. So the moment you have a signal and a drug causes some degree of euphoria, and remember, this is only in patients who have a history of drug abuse, not normal patients. That meant that signal would mean it would have to be a scheduled drug. You could not actually just prescribe it openly. And so the commercial model to develop it, when it was no superior to Ambien as a sleep drug, plus had potential of abuse because of the euphoria and be scheduled, there was no commercial model to market it, and that's why they dropped the program. They were that close to filing at the time.
Kim, I want to just go back to the story I told you about Novartis.
Yeah, I'm actually a pharmaceutical rep, so I know Novartis well.
Okay, well there you go. See, the story with Novartis was about a drug called Gleevec. Gleevec, Dan sat at the table, and the scientist was saying to him, I know you've got this cancer, CML, and this cancer is dreadful, but there's only 20,000 of these patients, and they die after a short period of time, so there's not a market. A commercial decision. Not the scientist, sorry, the marketing guys were saying this. Right. And the scientists were saying, well, hang on a second. Just give us a moment. This drug actually can prolong their lives. It's genetically targeted. And Vasella asked the question, will it help the patient? Rather how big the market is. And that resulted in what you saw, changes of many people's lives. The decisions that go through large companies are often predicated not by the science that's there, but by what is the market. And this is unfortunate, but hopefully over time that will evolve and change. Certainly we're going to drive a change. So I hate to be taking, you as a pharmaceutical rep know that well.
Unfortunately, yeah. I do.
So I just want to mention we only have about 8 minutes left, and I know there are at least 4 people still standing here.
Thank you very much for what you're doing for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anurag. My daughter, she's a deletion about 2 years age. I have 2 questions. The first one is for my wife who couldn't be here. Based on what you understand about the mechanism of OV101, how permanent do you think the impact is? In the sense, if you stop taking the drug, will you see a regression back to what it was? You have to keep taking it, and if you start learning how to walk, will you regress back if you stop doing it? And the second question was, we heard that Agilis recently got the orphan drug status. Is there something along those lines you guys are thinking? Is it a possibility which will help accelerate the timeline and other things?
So let me answer why don't you answer the first and I'll answer the second? How's that?
Sure. So the drug will be required to be taken because it doesn't alter we don't believe at this stage we have any data suggesting, there's a little bit of animal data suggesting you can create increased neurogenesis and increased cognition in chronic dosing in rats, but we believe you need to continuously take the drug to gain benefit. So I don't want to expand too much beyond that, but yes, this is a drug that you will see improvements we hope to see, and then when you see those improvements, they may gain in time because with use, with engagement with the environment, with additional therapy. So we're a huge believer that the drug is just one aspect to managing the condition. You will still need physiotherapy, you'll still need active treatment, you'll still need environmental engagement, you may need nutritional aspects as well. This is not going to be a panacea. It just fits in as one component, and like every complex disease, we believe is just one aspect where you need to continue to take the drug. So we believe it'll be chronically administered, so that's one. Unlike gene therapy, you put the gene in, it gets into the brain, and it's a one-time shot. So this will be a chronic drug. I'll let Jeremy discuss the orphan status.
So in all drug development, there are different ways of approaching it. The number one item to me, it doesn't matter how you go through the regulators, whether you be orphan, non-orphan, or otherwise, is to determine what is the clinical outcome that you want. Thereafter is decisions on whether you want to go into being an orphan designation, not orphan designation, what route you want to go through the FDA is appropriate. Different companies take different approaches. We will probably apply for that, but it was less important to us to seek that, and almost I would be very surprised if we didn't get it. It's not that difficult to get with a rare disorder. For us, the critical focus is to ask the question, how will the drug impact the disease? That's the critical. Our drug is one that has been given to thousands of patients. It's not at the starting point, it's in the middle of the development. This is not a drug that's going to 1 in 10 fail because there's some bizarre, most unlikely to fail because of some bizarre anomaly. This is a drug that we need to prove efficacy with. And so I'm confident that as we go into the FDA, we'll find the right paths, and all companies take their own route.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this, appreciate it. And as you can tell from my accent, I'm from Australia. So I guess basically this question is related not just to this trial, but to any other trial. How can we get it approved by the TGA in Australia so that, are you going to bring this trial, any other trials that any of the other guys are going to be doing out our way so that my child is 2.5?
So great question. First of all, we have to discuss rugby. There's a New Zealander here and a South African here and all the rest. So this is a global disorder. This is not a disorder of the United States, France, Germany, England, South Africa. It's not that. So we are definitely going to do that. And although I've been to New Zealand many times, I've never been to Australia, but I can assure you we're coming.
You're not missing much.
So the answer is we haven't started, but we will do. And we need to have the dialogue in Australia. The medical system there is beautiful. It's well organized, despite my New Zealand colleague. But just to give you very clear, we're both American, and very grateful for it. So yes, we'll be coming there, but we haven't yet started.
Okay, so it'll take a bit longer.
Not that much longer. I think the second we get rolling here in the United States and the EMEA, once you do that, everything starts falling into place. It's not trivial, but you will certainly do it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's get our last two questions.
My name's Suzanne. My son Drew is 16 in deletion. And first I want to say thank you because when we were given a diagnosis 15 and a half years ago, we were given no hope. So thank you guys for giving us some hope. Second, you said there were some side effects, and Drew has really bad side effects with every medicine we try, it seems like. So what are the side effects to the medicine?
So it's a good question. Everything we take has potentially got side effects, but I think this is one of the safer drugs that we've ever explored. When you talk about a drug, we talk about effects that are on target, in other words, that you expect knowing the mechanism of action. When you act on the target receptor in the brain, the GABA receptor, if you give too much of any drug that acts in that pathway, you'll cause sedation. That's why it became a sleep drug. So if you give very high levels, you will get sedated. So we know that. That comes at so when you feel sedated, some patients will have dizziness. Any drug that gets into the brain essentially has the potential of causing headaches as well. That we haven't seen that in many of the trials. We don't believe beyond those effects, and as I said, in people whose brains are primed, in other words, if you have a history of drug abuse and you're prone to have, and people take drug abuse because they want to have psychotic events. That's why you take cocaine, in fact, to get the high to change the world's perception. Those individuals at high doses have a predilection to having psychotic events, having hallucinations. We do not expect that at all. It was not seen in normal patients, even at doses 10 times what we're planning in this trial. So we don't expect that. This is a very, very safe drug. As I mentioned, the sort of doses that we're discussing are about 1/10 of trials that were previously done in conditions like Alzheimer's disease and Huntington's disease. So we feel we have what we call a very big therapeutic index. The functional effects compared to toxic effects are very, very distant. In other words, we believe we can go up the dose, double it, triple it, you'll still not see major adverse events.
Okay, and before your last question, if we could have the folks from Agilis come up here so we can be ready for our next session, and then we'll take our last question. Okay.
Hi, my name's Tom, and I'm from the UK, and I was just wondering, if your drug gets approved by the FDA and trials start here, what's the time frame for the drug being approved in the UK and Europe and globally?
Well, Tom, it does depend on our dialogue with the EMEA and with the UK, but we are already talking to physicians in the UK and several other countries actually, with the intent to explore how best to get it there as soon as possible. After all, this is the center of where Angelman was first diagnosed, and we'd like to get it there as soon as possible. In addition to which, I was trained in the UK, and I know that system extremely well, and know many. I'm a little older than I was a little while back. And many of the colleagues who graduated with me from Cambridge are now situated in roles within the UK that could definitely help accelerate this. And a lot of them have reached out to me and asked what we are doing. So I expect us to get it there as soon as possible. But first we must get it nailed down here in the US, and then we will go there. But Matthew's already talking to you.
I have a visiting appointment at the University of Oxford, and have already been discussion with the sort of rare disease network in the UK to work with the MHRA. So we're certainly looking at England as a place to really, a point of entry in Europe. I can tell you that.
Okay, thanks.
We're out of time, but can I just say one last thing, if I may?
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much for all of you thanking us. I'm very grateful for that. I think I'd like to flip it the other way. Expect a lot from us. Don't let us engage with us. We're going to be there with you, and we're incredibly privileged to have the opportunity to work with you. So I have to thank you, not the other way around.